A very warm welcome to the Circular Economy Leadership Microclass. Since COVID-19 has shook our world, we've been harshly reminded of the fact that we live in a VUCA world, a volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous world, which means that we are facing ongoing issues such as supply chain disruptions, new demand patterns, and just to survive, many businesses need to rapidly change. I'm Jackie Wilson-Smith. I'm the founder and the managing director of the Sustainable Innovation Company. I'm a design-led innovator and I'm a sustainable change activist. I'm joined today in this webinar by my co-host Ryan Hollis of everfocus and special guests. It's wonderful to have Ken Webster joining us from the UK. It's very early in the morning for Ken, and Ashley Morris, who is the CEO of Choreo. Both Ken and Ashley will be formally introduced shortly by Ryan. Together, we share a vision of hope for a new mindset and adaptive, innovative behaviour towards circularity. We believe that a fallout of the COVID-19 is an opportunity to see regional economies strengthened, more circular, sufficient and resilient. And since we've got to change anyway, let's change for the better, creating a more sustainable world where business can also thrive. So some housekeeping for today. This session is live. It is being recorded and it will be shared after the event. There will be two opportunities for audience participation. We do ask you to use the chat box as the primary function, and we have our chat box monitor, Briley Cleland from the Sustainable Innovation Company, who will be facilitating the chat. Also, please use the raise hand function in the two parts where we will be pausing for audience questions. Otherwise, we do ask you to kindly keep your microphones muted, but you're very welcome to put your video on. Enjoy the session.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. I'm Ryan Hollis. I'm a business advisor specialising in sustainability and the founder of everfocus. Earlier this year, Jackie and I attended a 3-day circular economy leadership masterclass that was collaboratively developed and delivered by Griffith University and Choreo. And in that class, inspired by what we learnt, and both being based here on the Sunshine Coast, Jackie and I decided to collaborate on this webinar. So our goal, what we wanted to share, is a snapshot of the theory with our local businesses and our networks, but more importantly, invite Ken and Ash as our guests to share their global insights on circular economies, and then highlight how some businesses can put circularity into practice with some case studies towards the back end. So it's our overall goal to incorporate the principles of circularity into everything we create or we redesign through our respective companies. So this morning I have the great pleasure to formally welcome our special guests, Ken Webster and Ashley Morris. Ken is currently working with the University of Exeter's Centre for the Circular Economy, and he's also a former head of innovation for the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Ken's also published a book in 2015 titled The Circular Economy, A Wealth of Flows. So he is extraordinarily well placed to share insights into today's global economy and the implications of COVID-19 and the future of the circular economy. So welcome, Ken.
Thank you very much.
And Ashley is a doer, a systems thinker and a passionate leader, as well as being an internationally recognised and awarded CEO. She founded Choreo with her sister Janie in 2017 and created Australia's first circular economy pilot project, the Circular Experiment, right here on the Sunshine Coast, with a mission to catalyse the global transition to a circular economy. And Choreo is now working with some of Australia's and the world's largest companies on their adaptation to circular economies. So welcome, Ashley. Both Ken and Ash will be participating in an in-depth discussion with us all shortly. So look forward to it.
And our agenda for today, we will start with a quick theory overview of circular economy and what does it mean. followed by a discussion with our guests, Ken and Ash, where we will be discussing what the impacts of COVID-19 are going to be having on circularity. And that will be also with a positive lens. From there, we'll go into a Q&A opportunity with the audience where you will have the chance to ask both Ken and Ash, Ryan and myself, questions through the chat box or by using the raising your hand function and having a chat. And then finally, Ryan and I will be sharing a couple of case studies that we've both found really inspiring, and also the projects after doing the masterclass that both Ryan and myself have been inspired to pursue. So without further ado, into the principles of circularity.
So some quick theory. Obviously, we're going to have a wide range of experience on the call today. So we've just kept this brief. But if you do want to find more resources on the theory, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation website's a fantastic resource. There are three key principles that define the process in terms of trying to shift from our current linear economies that we have to a more circular one. And the first of those principles is to design out waste. And the emphasis is on design in this case. So a circular economy reveals and designs out the negative impacts of economic activity that cause damage to human health and natural systems. And that can include greenhouse gases, hazardous substances, pollution of air, land and water, but it can also be structural waste such as traffic congestion and other systematic waste issues of that nature.
So the second principle is keeping products and waste in use for as long as possible. So this is really about preserving value, looking at the non-renewable materials that may be used and trying to keep those in circularity for as long as possible. So making items to last longer, more durable, ensuring that items and products are reusable, particularly if it's got non-renewable materials or aspects to it, so that we are not throwing things away that are non-renewable.
And then the third principle is regenerating natural systems. So that's basically avoiding the use of non-renewable resources, but also more importantly, preserving or enhancing renewable ones. So an example is returning valuable nutrients to the soil to support regeneration or improved productivity of the land, and using renewable energy as opposed to relying on the fossil fuels that have so long driven our economy.
I'm looking to our teachers, Ryan, to see how we're going. Do we get a thumbs up from Ken and Ash?
Can I just chip in something on the previous slide?
Sure.
If we go back and forward. Number 2 is really keep products, components and materials in use for as long as possible, because we don't want waste at all, because that's what we've said in point 1, technically, because you're designing it out. So it's just a little choice of the word there. What you meant was perfectly, that was spot on, but I would tend to keep away from the use of the word waste in that second one. It's products, components and materials. And I think it's worth just adding to that one, it's by changing circular economy is a business opportunity, as Ash will be discussing and yourselves. And it's really about imagining ways in which you can make an economic opportunity out of keeping products, components and materials in use. And it's not always for as long as possible, for an optimum period. So it is about economic opportunities. Otherwise, it can sound a bit like my father in the 1950s, keeping a drawer full of elastic bands in case he needed one. Of course, 98% of those still got thrown away in the end. That's just a quick comment, and I'm sorry if I took up your time there, because I'll get time later, I know.
That's perfect. Thank you very much. We love it. And so the 5 business models Firstly, we've learned about the circular supplies, and so what this really means is keeping those non-renewables in circularity. So looking at those materials that cannot go back to the land. These are the ones that we want to ensure that they keep being used. But it also is about replacing some traditional materials by items that may be, bio-based or from a renewable material, so that we're able to have a circular supply system.
And the second business model is about resource recovery, and that can be leveraging technology to recover and reuse those resource outputs. So we're aiming to eliminate any material leakage out of the system and maximise the economic value of those components for as long as possible, just as Ken mentioned.
And if we were to relate these principles to a light bulb, which we've got a picture of here, if I just backtrack and talk about the principle 1 of the circular supplies, you would be then applying that to, okay, if you have a light bulb, you'd be wanting to use recycled glass. You would be looking at the filament elements to ensure that that's got recyclable element in there too, with tungsten. And then ultimately you'd be wanting to have it powered by renewable energy. Over to you, Ryan.
Yeah, and so the fourth model is around sharing platforms. So that's all about sharing underutilized products and materials, and it aims to reduce the demand for new products and their embedded raw materials. So to use the light bulb example, it's maybe we're all sharing an office, and the question might be, rather than everyone buy their own desktop light, why don't we have some lights in the ceiling that we can all stand underneath, just sharing. But this model really brings in all of those technology focused businesses, entrepreneurs and startups, and I think it does provide a great example of where new market opportunities are emerging thanks to the circular economy.
And the third and the fifth business models, with the third is about product life extension. So this is ensuring that the life cycle is extended as long as possible. So using the light bulb example here, if you've ever heard of the centenary bulb, it is really looking at how a light bulb that wasn't designed to become obsolete, so it would continue to go, so the filament wouldn't break. And also LED is also another innovation that is addressing that. And the fifth one of product as a service is one that I'm always really inspired by, is why buy the light bulb when all you really want is the light? So that is a real mindset shift of businesses. Instead of selling things, they're selling a service, and that all of the principles would be incorporated so that circularity, you can disassemble it, you can ensure that the light bulb lasts for as long as possible, and the business model then completely changes into perhaps a subscription model. So this concludes our theory, and now we're going to be getting on to I think what is the more interesting parts of the discussion with our special guests Ken and Ash. And our first question is to Ken. And now that you've heard Ryan and myself share back after our learnings with both of you and the team through Griffith University, we'd love to hear from you, Ken, as to how would you describe circular economy in your words?
Thanks very much, Jackie and Ryan. It's usual for me to say that the circular economy is not a linear economy, and that's so obvious in some senses. But it does hint at some of those business models you've been talking about. We built most of our modern industrial world on take, make and dispose, because we could get larger scale, lower costs, increase productivity, increase employment. Even if some employment was wiped out, there would be plenty of additional demand for people to do other things to create new goods and services which would help improve our our standard of living. But the whole problem with that is that it is throughput. It degrades natural and social capital. It converts it really into financial capital and a lot of waste, as we've well known. So the problem has always been, if you don't want that system, but you want to maintain a standard of living, how can you do that? Well, people like Walter Stahl and others had often recognized that you don't really want many of the goods you've got as goods. You don't want a refrigerator unless you collect them. What you want, a bit like the light bulb example, is you want chilled food. You want that service from your major durables. Some people, I mean, I like bass guitars. I'm a musician. I have more than one. And really that's part of saying, well, do I really need more than one when I can only play one at a time? But at the same time, they are pretty much hugely durable. They will last for a very great deal of time. I can pass them on to people in my family or others who are enthusiastic about it, because they're designed to provide that service of making music over a very, very long time period indeed. And so the idea is, how do you make money out of this idea that you don't go take, make and dispose? You've got to have economic opportunities which allow you to make money by either providing, well, you listed 3 of those 5 business models rely on digital, if you like. Digital is changing the rules of the game in business. How come you can sell light as a service, as Schiphol does in their lounges in the airport there? Because they can monitor, because they can provide a more competitive service than just buying light bulbs and having to maintain them. They can add an advantage for a company like Philips or their subsidiary, but also the people buying the service. This is the key thing. Digital has allowed us to change business models which benefit both sides. You don't have to sell it. You can provide it as a service, or you can design it in a way that it's monitored. The return on investment for remanufactured engines or heavy equipment is something like 5 times that of the return on investment for new engines. So as Renault have known for decades, if you can create a good market for remanufacturing, you're rich in dollars. You're rich, or quids in, as we say in England. You've got the money from that. So I see it very often that if you're going to shift from a throughput system, you have to put something in place which is an economic opportunity for businesses. You've highlighted a couple of examples there, but this is spreading through industry more and more, because even in mining, there are businesses which will lease you the drill bits. You can keep exchanging them for other drill bits because they're then refurbished. It's not so that you use them up and then you've got to buy another one. There are a very large number of intelligent business models which are allowed to do that on the technical side in the durables thing. So the challenge is to make it an economic opportunity. It's not primarily, notice, done for environmental reasons, though in many people's minds it's great, it's a bonus. And as people like Walter Stahl point out, it should also bring more employment too, because it's more customer facing when you're doing refurbishment, repair, providing goods as services, upping utilization of existing assets. That should add an employment element to it. So it's really a different business framework fueled by or brought up to date by digital technology.
Great. Thank you so much, Ken. I think some key outtakes that I've had from what you've just shared there is that it's not just about sustainability for the environment. It's also about sustainability for jobs, for new business models, and that there is actually a really strong business case and commercial reason why we should be shifting towards circularity.
Yeah, but I have to say, Jackie, it's not easy because the whole system runs in a very linear way. Yeah. So it's taking those pioneers, those experimenters, time to find their way through to this. or to revive business models which perhaps had lapsed or been less profitable. So, it does do that, but, we're all realists. It's very hard to just change the business model without also changing the context in which it operates.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the key outtakes that we've all had, is that it's no good just one company doing this in isolation. It really is a whole systems collaborative approach, and we'll be touching on that throughout. Over to you, Ryan. I know you've got some questions.
Yeah, so I think that last little part of the discussion really illuminates this next question, which is for Ash. And we're wondering, Ash, through your your observations and your touch points with a lot of businesses at the moment in these really disruptive times due to the pandemic issues, are you seeing some of the circular business models that we've talked through standing out more than the others? Are people being attracted to those types of business models due to the current disruption?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first and foremost, there's obviously a lot of concern placed just over keeping businesses operating, but those that I've been speaking to more recently that have already implemented elements of circular economy models and some of the key principles, they have found themselves, with better resilience through this time. For example, I was speaking with Stone and Wood, which are a brewery based down in northern New South Wales, and they have no waste in any of their operation. Any of the outputs are sold as byproducts, and the ability that they had to reduce any of their outgoing costs by converting what would be seen as waste into an actual product that was generating revenue, whilst it's small, it really has enabled them to maintain their operation when they've seen a 60% reduction overall in the sales of their beer. So it's, circular economy for a large extent to businesses that I connect with has enabled them to, have resilience. But we're also seeing a lot of creativity come through at the moment with circular economy, with, again, breweries starting to create hand sanitizers. I believe there was a global shortage. So what was once a waste output has now become hand sanitizer that's, supporting communities to, prevent the transmission of the COVID virus. So it is an interesting time, and it's interesting to see how circular economy can be applied, and the different actors that can step in times of crisis to really show leadership in this area.
And I think, to reiterate your point, I'm also seeing a lot of creativity from what you might think are unusual businesses or segments of a business. So on the hand sanitizer example, I just saw this morning a mining company's laboratory has manufactured their own hand sanitizer. So I think it is, it's very important that we do support businesses to work through the current conditions and survive first, but then help them realize that there are going to be some fantastic opportunities going forwards if they'd like to adopt some of the models. Thanks, Ash.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. On the theme of a bit of hope and opportunity, I've got a question for Ken. So how could the impacts of COVID-19 positively accelerate the shift towards circularity?
Well, since we're talking about some hopeful futures, we have to sort of be quite hopeful that you're going to get more of an upside than a downside. The downside I want to just point out straight away is that in times of recession or depression, it's very often the smaller businesses that get wiped out or absorbed or taken over by larger businesses. So there is a real danger in that happening. But let's look on the upside. In a broad sense, what this pandemic has shown is that the world's supply chains were overextended, brittle, if you like, lacking resilience is another way to put it, because the word's been used already. And there have been huge consequences for that. And in a sense, the advantages that come from extended supply chains and low costs have just been a way of hiding the real costs, because we're paying them now. We're paying the costs now because we can't get things which, when we see in Britain, for example, thinking where do we get some gowns from? Well, let's try Turkey. I mean, we're supposedly the 5th or 6th largest economy in the world, and we can't run up a bunch of gowns, which is remarkable. The other elements on this, of course, is you're going to need more resilient systems if you've got climate change on the go, which we have. If you're likely to get more pandemics or other variations of this in the future, you're going to need more local or regional manufacture. The political situation seems to be changing, where there's the notion of globalization has been seen to need some moderation, shall we say, if it's to be fair. And it's proved unequal to the task, because you can't really run a globalized system if you can't manage the risks. And you can't manage the risk. This is what we've learned in this situation. So I would see there are a number of reasons why we want to move towards a more resilient and circular economy, everything from employment to climate change to rebuilding soils to using, and you've been alluding to it, multiple cash flows, multiple opportunities from businesses. We also realize that the state, the governments in different territories, in the federal government or whatever, they do have a role. The idea that somehow you should make government as small as possible and then drown it in the bathtub is probably gone, because governments are the ultimate source of the provision of the lender of last resort. They're the provider of money as a last resort, at least the federal government is. So if you were to run a really properly free market, you'd have to say, well, we'll let all these firms go bust. Well, no, we're not going to do that, because there is a legitimate role in creating a thriving economy, which has got an entrepreneurial role, if you like, from government, in my view, which would be to encourage these more local and regional productive systems, which are flexible, adaptable, and would do a far better job with resources in an era of uncertainty than an overextended system which has been exporting its costs into the society and environment. That experiment is in a way done. The question is, what sort of balance do we want between the large scale, the regional and smaller scale? And I think that's a positive set of ideas that's come out. It's many of the, Warren Buffett always said that when the tide goes out, you can see who's been swimming naked. And I think this applies to the economy at the moment. There will be some restructuring, though I come back to my original comment that a sort of business as usual approach would lead to the concentration of a few firms dominating markets as they use the recession as a way of scooping up less buffered firms, or firms less able to tap the benefits of lobbying. I hope that's I think it's a balanced approach. It's got not just total hope. All of these things are they're an interplay between good and bad things, as I think most people reckon.
Yeah, so I'm getting that, key outtakes of that is I think there's an increasing role of governments, around the world, to be helping entrepreneurship, to be helping businesses to thrive, and just leaving it to market forces may not be the appropriate response at the moment, and that there are opportunities for increasing the productivity in regional areas, again, around the world, and it really started to question the globalization and what that sort of balance is between the long supply chains that may be very efficient and keep costs down low, but then they come with risks that we're starting to see that these just cannot be managed. And when we're more self-sufficient, we can have shorter supply chains, more self-sufficiency, and so they're the sort of outtakes I'm getting from that.
Yeah, I'd add another one, because smaller scale production does cost. Usually, you can't take advantage of economies of scale, obviously, but it can take advantage, as an example of breweries and other or farming type businesses, of looking at where the multiple cash flows might be. so that, just to use an example from agriculture, people are beginning to look more at profit per hectare rather than yield per hectare. You know, am I joining the commodity market, simplifying, concentrating on just one thing, or is there a value, perhaps supported by efforts towards climate resilience, to look at how do I regenerate my soils? What can I get from a regenerated soil? Alan Savory's system is being used in Australia. I know it quite a lot. This they call it holistic grazing, but it has a different way of approaching how stock is managed and how soils are managed. So you do need this different perspective on that, and it needn't be high cost overall. It might be for the farming unit more profitable overall, but it would require more input of knowledge and experience and capital to adjust the business model to take advantage of, say, in this case, regenerative agriculture. So it's not a simple plug-in fix. Oh, I'm going to sell the product as a service, or I'm going to do it locally. There are, you know, you've got to make the system work effectively.
Yeah.
And you can't just, it's not a plug and play thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So it's coming back to that real requirement for collaboration and redesigning entire systems, which again, we can't be doing that alone. But I guess with that necessity now, which is giving us that impetus for change. Yeah.
We know that the question like where would you get the money from is not really relevant, because any country like Australia or the UK who controls the manufacture of its own currency can provide sufficient that is required on the proviso that the economy responds to the stimulus.
Yeah.
If the economy doesn't respond, you get rising prices. But you've no need to say, where will I get the money from? Because it's quite clear that countries all over the world have just said, well, we need to spend some money here. And they didn't reach into a cupboard and say, oh, look, I found a couple of $1 trillion. No, they didn't. They just got the federal, whoever's generating this, the Central Bank of Australia or whatever, to provide that liquidity as required. So that's important, because it's more a question of what are your priorities for this money? How should it be used? Not can we get any? So you could have, say, a national development bank for agriculture, which would say, we're going towards regenerative agriculture. You'll need some help shifting your, you know, improving the soil in a sort of, to be more, you know, to regenerate the soil, to be more alive. We can help you do that, because we know the benefits in the end will be solidly economic as well as environmental and social. So I think there's a bit of a breakthrough there, that some ideas are not silly anymore. They're almost, the question comes is, who do you want to save? Who gets the benefit of this shifting round of expenditure? And that's interesting, but it shows that it's open to being done. You know, in Britain, in Britain we decided, well, we can put all the homeless in hotels or apartments for now. And in a couple of weeks it was done, except for those who doggedly will not take up the offer. But, you know, it wasn't that it was not impossible. It wasn't impossible to do. It was whether you had the will to do it.
Yeah.
And I think this is some of the loosening in the thinking that's going on now, which circular economy initiatives can take advantage of.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and it's I'm certainly having lots of discussions myself about, you know, different types of economic theories, and, you know, learning about the well, if governments are providing this, how do we pay for it eventually? And those sorts of conversations are really starting to bubble up to the top, and alternative models are being looked at. So thank you, Ken. Over to Ryan.
Yeah, so let's maybe continue on with that last little bit around, perhaps we would call that changing our behaviour from governments and leaders and businesses. I've got a question for you, Ash, which is, when we think about how do we get to circular economies faster, what kind of changes in behaviour do you think is important that we can all adopt, either as a leader or a business owner? What is it that we can work on in terms of our behaviour?
That's a really good question. We get asked this quite a lot, and the answer is always quite simple. I would encourage people to not wait for permission to do something, and it's really just comes down to being brave and bold and taking action. And that action might be, if you're a small business owner, that might be looking at anything that you would right now class as waste and seeing what you could do about it. It might be speaking to your neighboring businesses that have similar waste streams. So I think finding those means of collaboration, taking action, connecting with people, in line with what the principles of a circular economy could mean and offer to you. That is what really counts right now, is that we do something about it, more than just listening, learning and talking, but making sure what we listen, learn and we hear from people is put into action.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
So I've got a final question. I can ask it to both Ken and to Ash. What should we have asked you today?
You can start, Ash.
Oh, thank you, Ken. I find. What should you have asked? Ken seems on fire really at 12:30 a.m. You really should start with Ken. If you're ready, Ken, you go.
I was just trying to be a good team player there, Ash.
I know, you're amazing.
Right. So, hello, Ash. We haven't really spoken for a while. So
Ash, we can't see you, by the way.
Sorry?
We can't see Ash, by the way.
My video is on, but for some reason you are seeing, I'm watching you through my computer because I'm on my phone.
Oh, I see.
I know I can see my video is working, but you're seeing a black screen. So I do apologize, everyone. I'm going to try to get my lovely face up for you all. But I'll let Ken answer the question why I...
Yeah, the big thing that people always miss with circular economy, I believe, is that circular economy describes a set of interdependent relationships. It is a systemic approach in the biological side of things, in the biosphere, the products of consumption, things that get decayed. It's about cascading materials through there, which allows people to generate value at each stage as it goes towards being decomposed, which probably requires an enterprise network, a network of businesses that are related to each other. Yeah. They might all be quite small businesses, but they will find ways of collaborating and building value. You could have asked a bit more about that, but I think the big thing this points to is the rules of the game. What are some people think you can change the economic policy, but just don't mess with the economics. And I think that might have been a really good question, is what sort of economics, as in how we think the economy works, the theory of it and other things, because it's very dependent on theory, but it's been the same theory, if you like, has dominated for 40 years. Neoclassical, it's called, as an approach. And the problem with that is that's based on almost an idea that the world is in equilibrium in the long term. It's about the shocks are always external, whereas circular economy is always talking about systemic relationships, in the jargon, non-linear, feedback rich. The economics has to match the aspirations of having a systems approach to product components and materials. And that's one of the big mismatches, is that the economics hasn't really caught up with what people are seeing and trying and doing, because it's still focused on the supply side. How do you get more productivity? How do you lower costs of ownership or access? Yeah. How do you improve productivity? How much economic growth can we squeeze out of this? When Walter Stahl and others, and I have to recommend his little book, you probably won't see it, it's called Circular Economy, a User's Guide, emphasizes that what we're trying to do is enhance capitals. The stock of wealth in a country is the stock of solutions we have available to people, surely. Because otherwise it's like measuring the economy by just looking at the speedometer on a car to tell you if that car's good. Oh, it goes fast. So we wouldn't just use a speedometer to judge whether the car is good. And equally, Walter and others say that you should be looking at stock maintenance or stock improvement, the stock of not only flows, which was my book, but the stock of capitals that are there and available to us. So for me, circular economy is regenerative, accessible, and abundant by design. And that takes probably a different sort of economics to come in. And we're only just seeing very small parts of that.
Okay.
So that would be my rough.
All right. I think that's a great question, and that could be a webinar in itself. I think, you know, what does a good economic system look like that's going to support circularity and an abundant system for the future? So let's hold that.
Yes.
And whilst we've got our chat monitor, and I can see some questions have come through. We're just going to have a quick look at those whilst we open it up to Ash as well. So Ash, any more comments while we look at the chats?
I think just one more comment, because the more everybody starts to understand what the circular economy presents, I think the question or the feeling might be one of being overwhelmed when we are really trying to change the economy to, you know, be more equitable and abundant, accessible, as Ken mentions. And I think when you start to understand the enormity of that and you have those feelings of being overwhelmed, I would really want to encourage people to understand that there is so much power in the collective. And there's a great author that talks about the need for a new story and the need for a new narrative. And we're at a point in time, and this is such a rare opportunity that we all find ourselves with at the moment, with the ability now to create that new story about where we want to go. And, you know, for a story to create and shift an economy, you know, we need everybody to be on the same page.
Yeah.
And I think that means your voice does matter, whether you are a tiny micro business like the organization I run, or whether you're a massive player in our economy, your voice matters equally in that dialogue. And I think just make sure that you know that you matter, your voice matters, the decisions, actions that you make will all matter to the transition to a circular economy. So that's just what I wanted to mention.
That's awesome, Ash. And I think that sentiment came through loud and clear when Ryan and I were participants in the 3-day leadership course. So really inspired us to step up and do this today. There have been some really good questions come through in the chat. And the first one was about, could you please share, you know, where does the donut economy fit in?
My friend Kate.
Yes.
Kate Rayworth.
Yes.
Yes. Kate and I know each other, and I made some inputs around the circular economy element in her donut economics. Now, interestingly, because we were talking about the need for a different sort of economics, she's done probably one of the best popular or accessible books on how you access discussion around the shape and direction of the economy. I think it's done remarkably well. It's had, you know, the sales have been tremendous, and it caught the mood of the time, and still does. That part of this discussion is, how do we get to what she would call a donut economy, which is a safe space for humans within the environmental limits, but getting everybody out of poverty and making sure that it's within the donut, which she calls a safe and prosperous place to live. I think she's essentially right. The circular economy is part of a tool to do that. And if you look at, she's had a lovely diagram in there, which looks at conventional economics and the 21st century economics, she calls it. Moving from a linear to circular economy is one of the 8, or one of the top 7 or 8 activities that we need to do. So it fits in with a systems approach. That's what she's saying. She's saying we need to take a systems approach, systems thinking to this. So it's spot on, but it gets quite a bit of resistance from some business arenas, because it's got this element of equity and a thriving economy. It's not really a place where you extract value and stuff it into places where it can't recirculate.
Yeah.
Should we say? It it annoys some people because it's quite a long way from the business we know now. And I've been in Australia enough, and my brother lives in Queensland, to know that, for instance, say the real estate market is so important to not only our economy, but your economy. And that's an example of something where money goes into these assets and they're not really productive. They're not part of a productive economy. And some of that would probably change in a donut economy. So I'm just illustrating where it can
I see. Yeah,
push people's patience a bit, or tolerance a bit far.
Okay, well, it sounds like we've got a few books to read as a result of this. Tying them up. There was one more question that came through on the chat box, which was about digitisation. Have either Ash or Ken got some examples of a business that has really adopted digital tools as a way of, promoting the shift towards circularity?
I'm just inviting Ash, because I'm always greedy with these things.
We can share. There's a lot of big names out there that have done something, but maybe to draw an example from here in Queensland on a project that we support, which is with Lendlease. So they have a community based in Logan, Yarra Bilba. It's a greenfield community. It'll be home to 50,000 people over the next 30 years. To develop their circular economy strategy, and also to start now implementing projects, they've embedded fibre throughout the community. They've looked at having smart meters across energy, water, and also doing a lot of auditing around material flows in the community to form evidence-based best practice. All of that data is aggregated into what they would call a community database, which is also made available to the community, and which they then make decisions on, knowing what they need to do to make sure they can extract the maximum value from the utility flows and material flows that they have within the community. So it's a much more practical, I guess, example from here in Queensland, but it is using smart meter technology and data platforms to make evidence-based decisions.
I'll just add one in the building and construction one. I'm on the supervisory board for the Madasta Foundation in Amsterdam. They're working on materials passports for buildings, so that all the data about what's in a building, existing buildings particularly, is able to be uploaded into a database, so that when these buildings are remodeled or changed in some way, or even knocked down, we know what valuable materials are in there. And so this operation of the Madasta Foundation helps make sure, through digital logging, that the value and opportunities within the built environment in Amsterdam, Taiwan, Singapore, they've got branches in all of these areas, it is available to people, and so that it reduces the waste enormously, because you know what you've got there that's valuable.
Yeah, that's really cool. And just for our participants too who are listening in today, we've had lots of book recommendations and some case studies. So in our notes that Ryan and I will be collating at the end, we'll include some links so that people can learn more about these examples, such as the building passport in Ellen. Sounds awesome. At this point, we just want to thank Ken and Ash immensely for being our special guests. It's very early in the morning for Ken, so we want to wish you a good night if you would like to leave. You're very, very excused for good reason. And of course, you're welcome to stay on and hear. Ryan and I have both got a case study each, and also we want to share our projects that we've both are taking some leadership on in our communities.
If I can just thank everybody for being in on this session. I've enjoyed it very much, and even though it's late, it's been fun. So thanks very much. I'll catch up with the recording at another date. Okay.
Great. Thank you so much. Sleep well. He's got another meeting at 8 a.m. Good night. Great. Well, we're now going to head on to some case studies. So over to you, Ryan.
Okay, so we've chosen local case studies to the Sunshine Coast. And the first one I would like to talk about and share with you is about Brouhaha, which is a brew pub based in Maleny. And it's, for those that don't know Maleny, it's up in a lovely hinterland country sort of setting, very local based community. So Brouhaha brews fresh local craft beer on site, and they also serve those beverages along with restaurant food that really aims to utilise hyper-local ingredients. And what the team at Brouhaha see as hyper-local is anything that they can source and get supplied from within about a 35-minute driving radius of Maleny. So they're a local business, and they're really focusing on being part of their community. Like all breweries, they do have byproducts out of the process. And one of the key ones is called spent grain. So in the early stages of the brewing process, they use malt and other grains to kick off the brewing, but they end up with a byproduct. And instead of disposing that grain as a waste, Brouhaha has gives it all away to a local Wagyu beef farmer who's situated along 3 kilometres away from the brewery. So it's very, very local. And the farmer comes and collects that grain each week. And getting that grain source as a feedstock for his cattle allows that farm, which is a small family farm, to actually operate sustainably. When you're in the business of building up and raising Wagyu cattle, it's quite expensive to build up your herd. So getting that feedstock from the brewery is a real benefit for the farm. The farm sells their cattle wholesale back to the Maple Street butchers, which are based in Maleny. So only goes 3 kilometres back. And the butcher treats the animals there, and then what's the beautiful part of this circular loop is Brouhaha then take a whole Wagyu animal on a regular basis for their restaurant, and they treat it nose to tail and put it through their dishes for their customers. So they make cured meats all the way through to curries. You know, the chef from the restaurant regularly interacts with Ken the farmer. And it's a full circular loop, and it's really an amazing little story up in Maleny. On the side, the butcher themselves uses some of the brewery's milk stout products to make their own sausages with the Wagyu as well. So it's a fantastic little example, I think, of what we talked about today, which is, you know, cascading value within your local community, building short, resilient supply chains, and really having an interdependent relationship. So when I looked at this a little bit further as a case study, and I had a chat with Matt, the head brewer, I sort of tried to understand why they went down this path of creating the loop. And his view was that it's all based on their strategy of being a local business in a small town who wants to really contribute to their community and get to know their suppliers by first name. And he wants that to be their point of difference. So it's a point of difference to the traditional economic business models. And he just feels it's the right thing to do in their mind. It's they get very close supplier and customer relationships that have, in the end, amplified their ability to communicate as a business and highlight new opportunities with those suppliers using shared information. And a shared goal of keeping the value in the community. So an example just recently was one of their patrons had an excess of grapefruit, and due to the relationships and the close communication, Brouhaha was able to identify that opportunity and bring the excess grapefruits into the business, and they incorporated it into their menu. The slide that you can see on the screen, it just shows a little way of, I guess, analysing Brouhaha as a business against the 3 key principles for the circular economy and the 5 business models. So anywhere where you see green graphic, that means Brouhaha is really doing that very well. So they're keeping their product and their waste in use as long as possible by circulating that spent grain around through the farming system. they're regenerating natural systems by helping supplement feedstocks on Maloney Wagyu beef farm. And they're also doing a lot of other smaller initiatives, I would say, to design out their waste. So they recently just replaced their plastic ring holders for their cans with a biodegradable, compostable in your own, house compost material, or you can actually recycle it through the paper stream. So they actually use 3 of the business models. They're recovering their resources. They've got circular supplies, and then they also have a forum with all the other local breweries on the Sunshine Coast where they share their needs for resources that they may not have quick access to. So they quite often share amongst themselves. And they find that helps them, stay more resilient and able to sort of work their way through this current pandemic. So one of the main pictures you'll see on the slide there is a restaurant meal on a lovely plate, but also the same meal packaged up as a heat and eat product, which is how Brouhaha has sort of pivoted in this current pandemic crisis, because they can't run their restaurant, obviously. So they're now home delivering heat and eat meals from the restaurant, along with their beers, and also fruit and veggie boxes from their suppliers through their little supply chain out to their customers. And that's one way that they've managed to show resilience and keep operating through the pandemic. Probably, I tried to think about, for those people on the webinar, what would they like to know about what was critical to the success of Brouhaha implementing this circularity. And there's 5 key points I've pulled out there. One is that their strategy is to be very local, and we heard Ken talk about how important that is. All of their actions that they take as a business and their decisions, they don't wait for permission, as Ash said. They go out and take action. It's all based on their community and their point of difference of being local, serving local fresh beer for consumption by the community. As I mentioned, one of their success factors is hyper local suppliers and those close relationships, and they get to know what's seasonal, what's in abundance, and what they can use on an evolving basis. And probably what really stood out to me is they had a real mindset about learning how to do things differently, especially in the restaurant. So taking their first Wagyu animal and doing it nose to tail was a real learning experience. But they've managed to really get good at that over a period of time, and are developing a lot of products from that source of meat. And I guess they shared that it was cost challenging in the first place, which we heard again earlier today about. It is cost challenging to change to a circular model, but where they've seen benefit in just the recent times, with the supply chains being disrupted around the world, beef prices have gone up. But the Maloney Wagyu has sort of committed to keeping their prices as they were prior to the pandemic, based on their relationship. So it's a real example of how, addressing circularity and being local and having those close relationships makes you resilient and better able to adapt. I asked the head brewer what would he share with all of you on the call today about his key learnings, or key learnings for you to think about. And he raised 2 points. So one was to make sure you're finding your point of difference, and you're not just, I guess he used the word copycatting what other businesses do. So he really impressed on learning how you can contribute through your business to your local area, understanding the cascading value loops that are there already and how you might add to those or use them. So again, that's reiterating one of the key messages from today about interdependent relationships and the power of the collective. So understand what's there, how you can use it, and how you can contribute. And his last point was that he sees a lot of support for local businesses, and he can only see it continuing to grow and get stronger as time goes by. So I really love this case study, because for me, I live just down the road. I drink the beer, I eat the Wagyu. It's a fantastic example. It so well fits with our environment and community ethos here that it builds up some really nice collateral for Brouhaha with their community. So I hope you enjoyed that case study. If you've got any further questions, just pop them through, but we can move on to the next one.
Thanks, Ryan. I love that this is a story about beer in your neck of the woods, and I wanted to share also a story about beer in my neck of the woods. So I live in Iwawau, just probably about 40 minutes drive from where Ryan is. So I'm just outside of Yamundi, and there's a really fascinating farm with beer that is 5 minutes drive from my home. It's probably a half an hour horse ride, so I should get over there on horseback one day. But this farm is a vertical farm system, and I've been fascinated with it since it started a few years ago. And firstly, it was just the vertical farm system underneath this big grey shed, and more recently, in the last year, a microbrewery, craft brewer, has gone in underneath the same shed too, which is Torella Brewing. And obviously this shot is pre-COVID-19, with all the families spilling outside, enjoying the beer and the grass-fed beef that's on this farm as well. And why I wanted to showcase it with everyone is that it's a great example of a symbiotic circular relationship which is going on, and there's lots going on here, but I just wanted to really just hone in on a couple of really interesting things. So firstly, with the vertical farm system itself, it has these micro cells where you have a climate controlled area where you can grow green leafies. So whether that's herbs or kale or lettuce, it's a system, and inside that that cell is the perfect temperature for growing green leafies. And inputs into this system are these reusable clay pebbles, which you can just see on the centre picture there. And those pebbles have got all the microbes that are going to keep the fruit, keep the vegetables really healthy and nutritious. And an input is water, but it's not distilled water, it's just normal water would go into it. So an interesting output from these cells is distilled water. Now, if anyone knows anything about brewing, if you're going to make beer, you need to have distilled water. So why this is really interesting is that the brewery then is taking the distilled water and using that to make the beer. And then an output from the brewery is carbon dioxide. So if you know anything about growing plants love carbon dioxide. So the idea, and they're still trying to, they're working on this one rather than having done it, the water is going from the vertical farm system over to the brewery, but the plans are that the carbon dioxide will come back into the cell, the climate cell, and feed the plants. And by increasing the carbon dioxide, it would decrease the need for as much electricity. And then the other part is that the power source is also planned to be heading towards regenerative sources, so that it's not being dependent on fossil fuels. So it's just like Ryan, it's great to have a farm with beer just down the road. And in terms of the business models, this is really homing in on that sharing platform. So they're sharing the same roof, and lots of the all of the costs of running that are shared. And also you've got the resource recovery, so the carbon dioxide and the water, and the keeping things in circularity, such as those clay pebbles. So there's some really exciting things there. And in terms of product as a service, it's interesting that they're looking at not necessarily selling the fresh produce to international markets. They're really looking at how can this food system be something that could be sold. So it's selling the service of helping international businesses set up climate resilient farm systems that could have a symbiotic relationship on a really tiny footprint. So I like to imagine in the future, you could have a tiny version of this farm with beer on the corner of, you know, streets in New York, streets of London, that could have been dreamt up out of just down the road from me in Economies. So real kudos to the pioneering innovators in this space. So back to Ryan. Oh no, it's still back to me.
Hey, it's you.
Okay. So the other case study that I wanted to share with everyone is a project that if it hadn't been for the masterclass that I attended early this year, I probably wouldn't be doing. I had started talking about it with some initiators, but it was the catalyst of doing the masterclass and the real sentiment that Ash has mentioned a couple of times is don't ask for permission to take leadership. And so I really took that on board and thought, you know what, there is something on my doorstep in addition to a farm with beer where I believe I can make a difference. And if I collaborate with some other initiators, I think we can definitely make a difference. So as an in-kind project, and I guess for me personally, it's a bit of an experiment, I've commenced a sustainable dairy circle with some fellow initiators, and I wanted to share it with you all so you can see where I'm at, and hopefully we can check in 6 months or so, and I hopefully will have some progress stories to share. So the mission of this circle is to mobilise a collaborative team across the value chain, so farmers, processors, innovators, circular economists, and system thinkers to pioneer a sustainable dairy value chain. Bit of a sentence there. But we want to be using the principles and the business models of circularity as a springboard for some collaborative innovation. So I'm not doing this alone. I have joined up with some fellow initiators, which I think in any one of the themes that's coming through really loud is that to be really effective at being you know, pulling together circular economies and being a collaborative leader is that you really do need to be doing this with some colleagues. So in this case, we're all from different businesses, but everyone sort of collided with the idea of doing something for an industry at the same time. I can see we've got some chats coming through, and please keep the questions coming because we do have a session right at the end where we'll be able to answer some questions that are coming through in the chat box, so please keep them coming. So yeah, teed up with a couple of other farmers and a non-for-profit, and together we have outlined what the collaboration goals are, and we've put it out to, again, to farmers, to people in the dairy industry, but really importantly, we've opened it up to people outside of the dairy industry too, so that we can get some fresh thinking to be coming through. And we've set up these sort of 6 goals, and I'm really pleased to say we've now got 65 people have signed up to become collaborators to help achieve these goals. So we're looking at how to transition from that sort of broken supply chain to a much more of a value chain. So really incorporating those principles to improve the natural capital. So Ken talked earlier about all the regenerative principles around soil, and if we can decrease the inputs as to how to grow nutritious fodder for whether it's cattle, I should say too, it's not just cows, we're also looking at goats and camels, and there's buffalo a part of this collaboration too. And then really at the heart of this is creating a circular economy. We've heard that digital tools are going to be key, particularly when it comes to track and traceability, and with the sharing of knowledge, digital tools comes in as well, and with the sharing of assets, as an example, there may be some underutilized assets, and then ultimately looking at new and interesting ways to connect with consumers that perhaps haven't been done before. So potentially looking at new business models instead of buying milk from the retailer. It could be looking at, you know, subscription models and could consumers have a share in another, for instance, and that would potentially give them a closer connection to understanding where their dairy products come from. So they're the broad goals, and so one of the processes that I always go about as an innovator is using design thinking principles, and observing and getting out into the real world is one of my favourite parts. And I'm not from the dairy industry. I have had 25 years in agriculture and food industry, but this is certainly an industry that's been new to me. So during the process of learning, I've been out literally milking cows. And I think it was in early February, I actually did a whole shift by myself with, I looked after 65 cows all by myself. So that was a real experience, learning the fun way. So how does the approach work? So there's a 4-step approach, and so I've just shared some observations that would be happening, but with the 65 collaborators, and I do say that this is open for more people to get on board and learn the process and see if we can help create a better industry. We then will be defining the problems, and then we go into an ideation phase where we'll be using as a springboard the business models to ideate some new solutions. And then finally, we look at how to turn this into experiments that we can put to the test. And if they work, they can turn into projects. So where I'm at in this innovation path so far is that we've just launched the information session. We held a webinar similar to this last week, but we're still calling out for more collaborators to get on board. And they don't have to be based on the Sunshine Coast. It's just the starting point of where we will be looking at it. And then we get into that discovery workshop, which will be on the 20th of May, and this will be run virtually. And at that workshop, across the supply chain, we will have breakout rooms with facilitators, and each room will be representing a point in the supply chain. And effectively, all of the collaborators and small groups will work through that supply chain, so that as we work through, we get to identify the problems, and really importantly, we'll be mapping the waste as we shift through the dairy supply chain as well. And it's going to be a useful point for increasing the empathy across the supply chain too. So as an example, the farmers will definitely spend time thinking about their soil and their pasture. They'll be looking at the waste and how they're actually doing the milking, and they'll be looking at animal health and all sorts of aspects. But then the farmers will also shift right through to looking at what are the challenges for processors, and vice versa. So the processors will spend time looking at the challenges for farmers, and the same thing right through to exporters and innovators and marketers. So it's a really great way to improving the empathy and understanding the lens of the stakeholder as we work through. So this is sort of classic design thinking principles, but we'll be taking a whole cross-functional group of people in the dairy industry and outside through that journey. The next part will be the creative ideas workshop, and that's where we'll really be using the principles and the business models as that springboard for creative solutions. And then finally in July, and we're not sure whether these will be held virtually or if we'll be able to do it in a paddock by then. We'll just have to wait and see. But we will be at the point where we will be selecting the most impactful projects that we could do as a collective team, and really looking at how can we change systems. So and then finally, we'll be pulling together those working teams into looking for funding on how we can get it to go ahead. So I think as a wrap up, I really want to give kudos to Ash and Janie from Choreo, and Ken from the UK, from the Business School in Exeter, and Rob from the university, from Griffith University, and also to my fellow initiators for encouraging me to not ask for permission to take leadership, and not ask for someone to say, oh yes, we'll pay you to do that, because I just think, you know, this is a really great time for many of us to step up and take that leadership, because as a consultant, you know, there is an opportunity to show what can be done and to put those skills to the test. So I see it as an extension of my personal education, and I'm really inspired by it. And if anyone would like to join in, it is an inclusive invitation. So just head to my website, and under collaborations, you can just click on the register to be a collaborator. And I think one of the outputs is that you'll learn an innovation process as part of that journey. And what are the outputs? Well, we're hoping to touch on all of the 5 business models of circularity, and these will certainly be a springboard for innovation there. So over to you, Ryan.
Thanks, Jackie. Yes, this is the last slide of the webinar, and that this is just me sharing my commitment that came after the masterclass as well. Again, I'm very thankful for the way that Griffiths, Choreo and Ken all reframed the way I think about the circular economy, and how I could adapt this project, which I had been running for a little while. So I'm looking to build a knowledge sharing platform that's going to enable a shift to the circular economy within local government regions. So it's got a local focus. And it has multiple touch points. So it's aiming to work with consumers and their role within the economical dynamics. So moving from a linear economy to a circular, and what can consumers do to reduce and stop the disposal of product, materials and waste to landfill. And engage them in with challenges to look at what they do in the future to purchase products and services that, you know, are more focused on maintaining, reusing and refurbishing cascading loops of value in their community. And we're really looking to take the value that's generated by those consumer actions and share them back between the consumers themselves and the local government. The second point that the platform's aiming to do is connect businesses with those consumers. And it's particularly aiming at businesses that have circular products that they'd like to offer, and basically help them increase their purchase rate of that product and drive us further along the circular economy pathway. And then the last aspect of the platform is really talking about what we mentioned today earlier on in the session about connecting businesses with other businesses to identify where their circular supplies could come from in their space and in their local community, and what kind of resource recovery opportunities there are. So it's very much about building collaboration between businesses and helping them become more circular. So I sort of use the same assessment template about the 3 principles of the circular economy and the 5 business models, and I'm aiming to design it so it touches on and incorporates all of those elements. As you can see, they're all green. And then I guess the final thing to demonstrate that value is generated through circular economies is that the platform will donate a minimum of 70% of its profits back to local community groups who are either rehabilitating or regenerating or protecting the local environment. So we think that's really important for the platform to do, and it demonstrates the true benefits of a circular economy. So I guess I'd like to finish up today by saying my key learnings that I'm going to take into this project are design and design more. That's the key lesson I took out of the masterclass, is get your design right, listen to all of your stakeholders, redesign once you've done that listening, and then collaborate, engage and share the value. Yeah, that's my little project, and hopefully it just demonstrates all the different ways that anyone on the call today could take action themselves and collaborate and lead down the pathway to circular economies.
Fantastic, thank you. So we're at the end of our presentation, and we are asking for feedback from the audience. So we've got 2 questions, and please use the chat box, and I'll also have a look to see if we've got anyone who raises their hands. But the questions are: what insight or idea has inspired you today? So we'd just love to have that feedback so that we can include that in our in the information that we provide as a follow-up to that. And I can see some chats coming through there. And also, you know, what action or goal have you set for yourself or your organisation or your community that perhaps as a result of doing today, you may be inspired to take some leadership, don't ask for permission, and take some collaborative leadership that may help your community, your organisation, or your cluster, or however it is that you're working, that can help head us towards circularity. So we'd love to just know these so that we can share them as some ideas that are coming through, and also as feedback to see that the goals of what Ryan and I, and also Ken and Ash, started out to do. And we're hoping that you guys are all inspired, as Ryan and I have been, to take some leadership in our communities. So I'm just going to see if we've got any raised hands. So if you'd like to raise your hand and speak out loud, don't be shy. You can just pop your hand up. I don't see any hands up. So let's have a look at the chat box. I'm just going to go to our chat moderator. Briley, if I can ask you just to have a quick squiz through those chats to see if there's a question or 2 that's standing out for us to answer. Otherwise, we'll go into Briley. If I can just ask you to come
There was
on.
just one question from Vanessa. She said, which organisations have leveraged digital best for the circular economy? This was actually for Ken a while ago. I don't know if you and Ryan have any thoughts or any case studies that you can hand to hand.
I think we've probably covered that quite well. We had the example that Ken put with the Dutch company. And certainly with the case study that I shared with the vertical farm systems, that's definitely one that is really using so much technology in running that farm. So in fact, it only takes, the whole farm is run predominantly remotely, and there's about 3 or 4 hours a week that somebody just has to come in and sort of just check everything technically. So that certainly is a farm of the future, and really the designers behind it have been, you know, data analysts. So I think that's a really good example of how technology is really going to be such an enabler into the future. So I can see some more questions coming through, and as they do come, I think I certainly want to take this opportunity to say thank you very much. And Ryan, how about yourself? Any parting comments before we?
Yeah, so maybe I'll just quickly talk to Pritham has asked a question about digitisation transforming business models and promoting circularity with big business. I see it happening all the time, particularly, I'll just focus on the resources industry, but they are using digitization to drive their business in terms of building information about their material flows and understanding how they can optimize what might be a waste resource into a valuable byproduct. So there are quite a few case studies, particularly in the copper industry. What they're using information collected on a mass big data scale to help them make those decisions. And I think the other example I've seen is, which I love personally, which everyone can relate to, are the sharing platforms for the active travel solutions in a lot of our capital cities. So that might be the scooters that you see, but that's basically a digital solution to addressing traffic congestion and transport issues. And you know, if we go right back to the start when we talked about some of the principles of a circular economy, removing structural waste like transport congestion is a key point of circularity. So I think that's another example where, you know, the Limes of the world and a few other large companies are using digital platforms to transform the way we transport ourselves around the community.
Great. Oh, on that note, I would like to thank everyone very much, particularly Ken and Ash for being our guest speakers today, and Ryan, it's been an absolute pleasure collaborating with you on this, and I'm so glad that we did it. So everybody have a great day, and if you'd like to get in touch with us, our contact details are on the screen here.
And I'd just like to jump in and thank yourself, Jackie, for providing such great leadership, not just with our webinar today, but all over our local community on the Sunshine Coast in the food and agricultural space specifically, but just in generally as a collaborator and innovator. So thank you.
Thanks. It goes both ways. All right. Have a good day, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.